The autumn forest of the Drevlian lands stands frozen. The silence is sliced by the creak of taut ropes and the heavy breathing of a crowd. The year is 945, a tract of wilderness near Iskorosten. Two young birch trees, bent all the way down to the damp earth, tremble under colossal tension. A man is bound tight to their tops. In a heartbeat, the restraints will be cut. The trunks will violently snap back toward the sky, tearing the body in two. This is how the life of Igor Rurikovich ends. In history, this ruler often appears as merely a pale shadow of his great relatives, a transitional character wedged between the triumph of Oleg and the vengeance of Olga. It seems as if his role was reduced to simply passing the bloodline from Rurik to Sviatoslav. Such a view is a fundamental misconception. Igor held power for 33 years, an entire era. He ruled longer than his father and significantly longer than his son. It was specifically his era that marked the first systemic crisis of Rus, when the methods of the roving state hit a dead end. We are about to debunk the myth of the weak prince and witness the drama of a leader desperately trying to live up to a great name. Ingvar, in the language of the Northmen, means warrior of the god Yngvi, but the destiny of his reign was governed by two other elements, fire and wood. You will see the fleet of the Rus in the fiery trap of the Bosphorus, where the sea itself ignited like dry straw. We will examine the sworn treaty documented by Leo the Deacon, a document whose violation triggered a chain of fatal accidents. Our investigation will also touch upon the anatomy of betrayal within the Kievan elite. The prince's envy toward his own warlord, Sveneld, pushed the monarch onto the path of banditry, turning the collection of tribute into banal robbery. Before us is not dry chronicle, but a record of how greed burns through any obligation. A system resting exclusively on the right of might inevitably destroys its architect. Igor was transformed into a sacrificial victim. His blood became the price for Rus's transition from barbaric arbitrariness to law. The birches are bent, the ropes are singing. But before the wood snaps straight, we must understand. How did Rurik's heir and Oleg's foster son end up in this trap, betrayed by his own luck? Our immersion begins in the shadow of another's triumph, in a world where a young prince was required to do the impossible, surpass a legend. The year 912. Kiev. Smoke from funeral pyres melts over the Dnieper. Prophetic Oleg, the man who pulled Novgorod and Kiev into a single knot, fades into legend. His place is taken by Igor. Look at this ruler. The chroniclers call him young, yet this is merely a trick of the scribes. By the moment of his accession, Igor was already over 30. He spent his entire conscious life in waiting mode. For 3 decades, he bore the status of Rurik's son, while the keys to the treasury and the loyalty of the warriors were held by a stern regent. Now, power belongs to him. But along with the princely table, an unbearable burden falls on Igor's shoulders, the legacy of Oleg. Put yourself in his place. Your predecessor is a living legend. He nailed his shield to the gates of Constantinople. He beat a colossal tribute out of the Romans. He concluded the Treaty of 911, which turned Rus into an equal trading partner of the empire. Igor lands in a golden cage. Oleg's diplomacy secured life in the suburbs of Constantinople, free food, and duty-free trade for merchants. Rus is getting rich. But for a Varangian konung, peaceful prosperity means a loss of authority. The old guard, Oleg's veterans, Karli, Inigeld, and Farlaf, look at the successor with a silent question. These people remember the taste of great bloodshed and mountains of loot. How will Igor attract them? With quiet stability? In the harsh world of Vikings, a leader is valued not for years of tranquility, but for the weight of silver won in honest combat. Historians often term the next 30 years the dark period. The chronicles are silent about campaigns. From the outside, it seems as if the prince is passively enjoying his inheritance, but behind this silence hid a boiling cauldron of grievances. For 30 years, Igor accumulated frustration under the growing pressure of his own druzhina. The Byzantine chronicler Leo the Deacon sheds light on this lull. He mentions a sworn treaty that was in effect all these years. Igor remained bound hand and foot by the word Oleg had given. However, time worked against peace. The generation of the victors of 907 was aging, and a new crop of young wolves came to replace them, hungry for their own share of glory. A crisis of legitimacy ripened in Kiev. Igor needed a personal, victorious war to prove he is an independent predator, not just a pale copy of his predecessor. And the hour struck. The year 941. The situation on the map looks ideal for a strike. Byzantium is bogged down in an exhausting war in the east. Its best legions are fighting in Mesopotamia, and the fleet is blockading islands in the Mediterranean. Constantinople, the heart of the oikumene, remains almost defenseless. Igor makes a fatal decision to break the sworn treaty. This is not a petty raid, but a massive intervention. The prince gathers an armada that amazed even the sophisticated Greeks. Liutprand of Cremona writes of 1,000 ships. Later chronicles multiply this number tenfold, but the reality is obvious. The horizon of the Black Sea disappeared under sails. The prince doesn't doubt his success. His calculation is simple. If Oleg took the city with cunning, he will crush it with mass. He leads not an embassy south, but a horde ready to tear the Second Rome apart. Standing on the deck of his flagship, Igor already sees himself as master of the Bosphorus. He anticipates the moment when his fame will eclipse the greatness of his guardian. However, the ruler made a fatal strategic error. He prepared for the war of yesterday, counting on hand-to-hand combat. But Byzantium prepared a meeting with unknown technology. In the harbors of the capital, engineers hastily refitted old vessels, Chilandia. On their prows, they mounted copper tubes connected to mysterious boilers. Igor came for gold, but he led his fleet into the very mouth of hell. June 941. The Bosphorus. Igor's fleet enters the strait. Chronicles and Byzantine records paint a picture that makes the blood run cold. Thousands of longships filled the horizon from shore to shore. For the inhabitants of Constantinople, this sight heralded the apocalypse. The empire had fallen into a strategic trap. The main fleet was fighting the Arabs. The best legions had gone to the east. The capital of the world stood frozen, defenseless before the barbarian armada. Prince Igor, standing on the deck of his flagship, could already taste the triumph. Panic swept across the city walls. Emperor Romanos Lecapenos, in desperation, sent out only a handful of decrepit vessels to meet them, old Chilandia that they hadn't even had time to equip with oars. The prince makes a mistake typical of a conqueror encountering unknown power. He mistakes the technological trap for weakness. Igor orders not to sink the Greek tubs, but to board them for the sake of valuable captives. The Russian longships, light and maneuverable, rush toward the clumsy imperial ships, surrounding them in a tight ring. And then, the trap snaps shut. At this moment, history zooms in on the prow of a Greek Chalandia. There, hidden until the very last second, a massive copper tube, mounted on the prow and decorated with a lion's head, swivels around. A roar rings out, resembling a clap of thunder. Under pressure, a stream of dark liquid bursts from the muzzle. A flash. Greek fire. Liutprand of Cremona left us a chilling description of those events. The Rus, seeing the infernal flame rushing at them, threw themselves into the sea waves, preferring to drown rather than burn alive. The battle instantly turned into a mass execution. The secret mixture of naphtha, sulfur, and resin possessed a diabolical property. It fed on water itself. Attempts to extinguish the fire only fanned its fury. The air became saturated with the acrid suffocation of sulfur, and the sea turned into a boiling cauldron. Thousands of warriors in heavy chain mail fall overboard and instantly go to the bottom. Those who remain in the longships turn into living torches. Black smoke veils the strait, and the screams of the dying drown out the sound of the surf. Igor watches in horror as his dream of greatness turns to ash. His massive fleet, his pride, and his gamble on numbers, all destroyed by a handful of old men with siphons. The prince manages to break out of the ring of fire with only a dozen ships. He flees north, leaving behind a burning sea and mountains of corpses. It is not a victor who returns home to Kiev, but a ghost. For a Scandinavian konung, the loss of luck, haminga, is more terrible than the loss of an eye or a hand. A chieftain who leads his družina to such a catastrophe loses the right to power. The old guard of Oleg looks at Igor no longer with doubt, but with contempt. But humiliation births the energy of desperation. Igor understands if he drops his hands now, his own men will kill him. He needs a rematch at any cost. Obsessed with a thirst for vengeance, the prince spends 3 years preparing a new strike. He empties the treasury, buying up swords across the entire north. But now he changes tactics. Since Varangian infantry is not enough, he will buy steppe cavalry. Igor hires the Pechenegs. In 944, he leads an army south once again. But this time, history will follow a different script. Instead of a battle, a bargaining session will begin. The year 944. The steppe shudders from the stomp of thousands of hooves. Prince Igor has learned a bitter lesson. Now he does not rely merely on Scandinavian shields and Slavic longships. The ruler buys the advantage he lacked before: speed and numbers. Igor hires the Pechenegs. Imagine the scale. Moving along the shore, escorting the heavy dracars, is an endless avalanche of steppe cavalry. The prince leads a powerful coalition against Tsargrad, welded together by a thirst for gold and revenge. He needs a rematch. He yearns to see fear in the eyes of those who recently consigned his men to the fire. Byzantine intelligence worked flawlessly. Emperor Romanos Lekapenos, receiving a report about this armada, realizes this time Greek fire will not be a panacea. The nomads are capable of turning the Balkan provinces into ash without even approaching the capital's walls. Here, the wisdom of the politician manifests, replacing the fury of the warrior. A grandiose battle does not happen. On the Danube, far from the Byzantine frontiers, the envoys of Rus are met by diplomats. They carry not swords, but heavy chests. The Romans offer Igor a buyout, the very same tribute they once paid to Oleg, and even more on top of that. Igor accepts the gold. In this moment, it seems to the prince that he is the victor. He forced a superpower to pay while saving the lives of his warriors. The army turns back toward Kiev. However, a careful analysis of the document crowning this campaign, the Treaty of 944, reveals not a victory, but a hidden capitulation. Let us break down the conditions of this agreement. On paper, peace and alliance, but the essence lies in the details. First, strict bureaucracy. The era of the free market in Tsargrad is over. Now every merchant must present a charter from the prince, an official identity document with a seal, gold for ambassadors and silver for merchants. Without this document, a person turns into a criminal subject to immediate arrest. Byzantium establishes total control over the migration flow. Second, economic restrictions. The right to duty-free trade, Oleg's main trophy, is annulled. Now the Rus are obliged to pay customs duties. Furthermore, the purchase of precious silks is limited to a sum of 50 gold coins. The empire introduces strict limits, blocking the export of strategic goods. Third, geopolitical trap. Rus takes upon itself a humiliating role to guard Korsun against the Black Bulgars. Effectively, Igor turns into a border guard in the service of the empire, paying for this status with his own country's resources. But the most unexpected discovery awaits us in the final part of the text. In the concluding section describes the oath-taking rite, and here we see a picture of a fractured society. One part of the ambassadors, loyal to tradition, ascends the Kievan hill. They lay their weapons and gold at the feet of the idol of Perun, swearing that a traitor shall be slain by his own sword. But the other part, a significant part of the elite, chooses a different path. They head to the cathedral church of Saint Elia. And we, those of us who have been baptized, swore by the church of the holy Elia. This is a turning point. Years of trade contacts and diplomatic missions to Constantinople have not passed without a trace. Christianity has penetrated into the very heart of the Varangian elite. Half a century before the official baptism of Rus, the Druzhina is split along religious lines. The old gods of war are rapidly losing their monopoly. Igor finds himself in the center of this fracture. He remains a pagan, but his authority is weakening. He brought gold, but sacrificed sovereignty. He saved his warriors, but lost the unity of spirit. Igor enters Kiev. The treasury is bursting with Byzantine silver, but behind the external shine hides a systemic crisis. The army has become too numerous, and the appetites of the warlords exorbitant. The Byzantine gold will not be enough for everyone, and soon the gazes of the hungry wolves will turn not to overseas shores, but to their own subjects. Envy will be the spark from which all Kiev will ignite. Autumn 945, Kiev. Byzantine silver already fills the treasury, but a mutiny is brewing in the barracks, threatening the throne more dangerously than Greek fire. The princely title does not guarantee Igor the status of the richest man in his own city. In the shadow of the throne rises the figure of the voivode Sveneld. In an attempt to buy the loyalty of this Varangian Jarl, Igor made a fatal mistake. He gave him the right to collect tribute from the wealthiest lands, the Ulichi and the Drevlians. Instead of a loyal ally, the prince raised a dangerous competitor whose resources now surpass those of the state. Kiev is split into two courts, and one clearly outshines the other in splendor. Assess the scale of the chasm. Sveneld's pages, his junior retainers, flaunt Byzantine silks, sparkling with gold trim on their weapons. This is the true elite. Standing next to them are the veterans of Prince Igor himself. Their cloaks are worn, their chainmail needs repair. They look at the voivode's well-fed mercenaries with burning class hatred. The silence of the feasting hall is torn by a phrase that sounds like a verdict. Sveneld's pages are decked out in weapons and clothes, but we are naked. This is not a request for wages, but a direct challenge. The Druzhina directly calling the leader insolvent. In the harsh logic of the era, if the Koning cannot feed his pack, the wolves will tear him apart, or leave for the lucky Sveneld. Igor plans a small victorious operation to restore authority. However, with this step, he hand-singledly breaks the foundation of the state, the predictability of taxes. The prince makes a decision that turns a legitimate monarch into a ringleader of robbers. "Let us go too," he throws to his men. The Druzhina moves out into the land of the Drevlians. Instead of the customary polludia, regulated by tradition, a punitive raid begins. Igor seeks to collect tribute above the norm, effectively robbing his own subjects to soothe the envy of his soldiers. The system of protection in exchange for taxes collapses. State racketeering begins. The campaign proceeds successfully. Violence bears fruit. The wagons are full, the warriors' pride restored. The army turns toward home. It would seem the crisis has passed. But halfway to Kiev, finally greed eclipses the reason of the old prince. He stops his horse and issues an order that historians have been unable to logically explain for 1,000 years. The prince's wagon train creaks heavily under the weight of the loot. The campaign was a success. Igor's pages, who previously complained of nakedness, now carry furs, honey, and wax. The conflict is exhausted, and the princely authority has been managed to be solidified. But then, the inexplicable happens. Igor stops his horse. He peers into the columns stretching into the distance and makes a decision that contradicts both military strategy and common sense. Historians have searched for the logic in this act for centuries. Most likely, the prince required a ritual super-tribute for his personal guard, so that his immediate circle would not feel shortchanged against the backdrop of Sveneld's enriched squad. The prince orders the main forces to continue the journey home. He himself, with a small Druzhina, just a couple of dozen bodyguards, turns back toward Iskorostan. The chronicle has preserved his words, which became his epitaph. "Go home with the tribute, and I will return and walk some more." Walk some more. Behind this phrase lies the true tragedy. Igor is not satisfied with what was taken by right of force. Greed blinds the ruler. In his imagination, the Drevlians have turned into meek sheep that can be sheared endlessly. He forgets there is a limit to any humiliation. Now he returns not as a suzerain, but as a marauder, deciding to pick the victim's pockets after a robbery. But in Iskorostan, every step he takes is closely watched. The Drevlian Prince Mal convenes a council. His tribesmen are not savages. They are driven by their own pride and understandable logic. They see Igor has trampled the agreement. He has come not for a lawful tax, but for their lives. At the council, a phrase rings out that became a death sentence for any tyranny that has lost its boundaries. If a wolf gets into the habit of coming to the sheep, he will carry away the whole flock until he is killed. Before us is not a rebellion, but self-defense. The Drevlians realize if they give up their last possessions now, winter will bring the tribe death by starvation. The choice has narrowed to the limit. Either Igor dies or the entire people vanish. There was no battle, there was a slaughter.
The small Druzhina was exterminated instantly. The prince was captured alive. The Drevlians did not wish to kill him in the heat of the skirmish. They needed to perform an act of justice, a ritual execution that would demonstrate to all, such is the lot of anyone who violates the law.
The wilderness near Izgorostin, the same 2 birch trees. We return to the image with which we began. The trunks, bent by ropes, tremble, resembling the bowstrings of a giant bow. Prince Igor is chained to them. The Byzantine Leo the Deacon recorded this execution not for the sake of cruelty. For contemporaries, it served as a formidable omen. The restraints are cut. The trees rip upward. In the grim symmetry of the prince's death, a harsh logic can be read. Igor broke the row, the sacred contract with his subjects. In response, the people tore the ruler himself apart. Thus collapses not just a man, but an entire system. In these forests, the time of the roving state, when the prince acted merely as a lucky chieftain collecting tribute, came to an abrupt end. Igor's death proved one cannot rule a country like captured loot. When the appetite of power knows no bounds, the crown turns into a target. Panic mounts in Kiev. The news of the prince's death reaches the capital instantly. The situation looks hopeless. The heir, Sviatoslav, is only 3 years old. He is unable to hold a sword, nor the loyalty of the Druzhina. The Varangian elite stands frozen in stupor. The Rurik dynasty balances over an abyss. But instead of hiding in the forests, the Drevlians make a move that stuns with its audacity. Their embassy is already on the way to Kiev. Prince Mal thinks like a pragmatist. Having killed the wolf, he decides to tame the pack by offering Igor's widow his hand in marriage. Astounding cynicism. Mal does not crave the destruction of Rus. He dreams of leading it. Through this marriage, he intends to legitimize the coup and shift the center of power to Izgorostin. The victor sees in Olga only a broken widow, a living trophy. But he does not know who he has messed with. While handmaidens weep and warlords argue, Olga maintains an icy calm. Northern blood flows in her veins. She understands any weakness will result in the death of her son and the disintegration of the country. Igor left her a legacy of chaos and war, but along with it, the right to any retaliatory measure. The princess receives the ambassadors with a smile, promising them great honor. But in her mind, a plan has already matured that will turn the funeral wake into the bloodiest reprisal in the history of Europe. This will not be simple revenge. This will be the birth of a new order. To ensure Igor's tragedy is never repeated, Olga will replace the arbitrariness of robbery with law, creating the first system of taxation in Rus, uroki, fixed amounts, and pogosts, collection points. If the death of Igor was the finale of greed, then the reign of Olga will be the triumph of state reason. However, that is the beginning of a completely different saga. To see how a new empire was born in the flames of Izgorostin, stay with us until we meet again.